Great to have you with us. If you just want to introduce yourself and then get moving, the floor is now yours. I remind everybody that we are broadcasting live to YouTube, so I don't smoke on camera or make rude jokes or anything like that, just because it will be recorded for posterity. We'll leave our microphones muted. Ian, when you're done, or if you want to ask questions, feel free, or allow other people to ask questions, feel free to stop and pause. But we'll do a question and answer at the end for you as well. So yeah, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Tim. Great to be here with you guys. Great to see Colin and Andy there, and to meet the rest of you. As Tim says, my name's Ian Ashby. Tim, can you hear me okay? Just wave. Everything okay? Good. So I'm the team leader at New Frontiers Church. We grabbed the name, and I'm the team leader of New Frontiers Church in New Hampshire in the United States. I work closely with John Lanferman as a member of his team, and I serve a number of churches here in the northeast of the US, and had 3 glorious years with Colin Barron when he was over here. The church that I lead, the vision I think for all of our churches here in the northeast is to be sending churches with a global vision. Now, some of you may have heard Andy Martin speak on broadcast about a couple of months ago, about having the importance of having a global focus, whether you are an established church or a church plant. And if that's you, if your church has a global focus, then at some point you're going to have people who are going to want to go to the nations. And so really what I want to talk about is about being a sending church, some of the practicalities of that as it relates to the nations. Okay? I hope that's what you thought you were signing up for. That's what I'm going to be talking about. So if I can just start off by I'll just tell you a little bit briefly about our situation here. My wife Emma and I moved to the US from England 12 years ago. We came here to start a church in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, and when I first sensed God calling us here, I had a number of questions, and the main one being why? Why the United States, of all places? It really wasn't on our radar. It was out of the blue, and I felt God really impress upon me that it was for the nations. And in fact, I remember being in a prayer meeting, a group of us were praying for the nations, we're praying over a map of the world, and I remember seeing very vividly a vision on that map of a bridge, and it was a golden bridge going from the northeast of the United States right across to West Africa, which I felt represented the nations. It was a golden bridge. I felt it was speaking about resources, that we were coming to the United States to build churches to unlock resources for the nations. That would be money, gifts, people, and so on. But the bridge, there was two-way traffic. There was people coming and going. It wasn't just about us blessing the nations. It was about us being enriched by the nations, about this interaction. So when we came to the United States, we came really with that vision right from the get-go, but had no clue how we were going to see that worked out. No strategy for getting to the nations. And but we started with that vision and were kind of praying into that vision, communicating that vision right from the beginning. And as a result, we began to see God open doors for us in quite amazing ways. And I will, if you want to ask about that, I can talk about that in maybe the Q&A. I think 12 years on, I would say our goal today is to give a minimum of 10% of our church income to reach the nations. In fact, right now we're giving 15% of our church income to the nations because we're supporting workers in the Middle East. And that's on top of 10% that we're already giving to New Frontiers USA. So that's 25% of our church income, which we are giving to reach the nations. But actually a bigger goal of mine is not just to give 10% of our income, but actually 10% of our people we're praying that we will see 10% of our people go into the nations. And we're not quite there yet. We've got 20 people now overseas, including children. There'll be about 10 adults, mostly working into the Middle East. Although our whole church is really involved in praying, in giving, and visiting, and so on. I often tell our church that, you know, it's not about what those guys are doing in the Middle East. Rather, they're spearheading what God is doing through us as a church. They may be like the spearhead, but we're the shaft that is resourcing them and enabling them to hit the target, but it's one spear. So, you know, some of us, well, isn't there a tension between trying to reach people locally, as many of you are trying to do in church plants, trying to reach people who are local, and having a global vision? Isn't there a tension between those two things? But I think, you know, what we've really tried to communicate from the beginning is it's not just, you know, local or global, it's both and. It's Jerusalem and Judea and Samaria and the ends of the earth. And, you know, I think, you know, we're passionate about reaching our neighbors. We really want to make an impact upon our communities locally, and I could, you know, share ways in which we're doing that. But it's to the end that we might catch them up in God's global mission. So we're reaching people locally, it's to catch them up in this global mission that we're about. You know, I think this is particularly important for our young people. You know, increasingly, you know, young people need something, a vision bigger than themselves, and wanting to see the world. And so often, you know, they end up going with YWAM or OM, and not criticizing them, but we really believe that you know, it's the local church that is God's mission agency, and because that's what we see in the book of Acts, isn't it? In Acts 13, that, you know, Paul and Barnabas didn't say, "Hey guys, we feel called to go overseas, so see ya," you know, because that's how often it seems to happen in our churches. But their call came in the context of a church prayer meeting. It was where the leaders of the church, you know, were, you know, witnessed to what God was saying. They prayed with them, they fasted with them, they laid hands on them, they commissioned them, they sent them out, and then Paul and Barnabas, you know, came back to the church to, you know, to give a report to them. So, you know, I don't think this is just something that's specifically for my church or our churches here. You know, I think that this biblical mandate to make disciples of all nations should be the vision of every church and should be in the DNA of every church plant. I won't say anything more about that, because Andy Martin kind of covered that really in his broadcast. So if you didn't hear that, it'd be worth checking that out on YouTube. But just to say, you know, I remember Dave Devenish a number of years ago speaking from Isaiah 49, verse 6, how, you know, it's too small a thing just to restore the tribes of Jacob. That, you know, if that is our focus, just focusing on our own tribe or our own people, it's too small a thing. And, you know, because God's called us to be a light to the nations. And so, you know, I remember Dave saying, you know, if the nations aren't in your church's vision, then it's too small a vision. If your prayer meetings don't include the nations, then your prayers are too small. And if your church budget doesn't include the nations, then it's too small a budget. So that's the vision, right? But what I really want to give you is some practicalities, okay? Apart from it being biblical, why is it important that people are sent out from the local church, and how does that work practically? So I just want to give you two main things, really. The first is financial, and the second is pastoral. So first of all, financial. I think it makes sense that the local church be the primary base for financial support. You know, if you take the kind of traditional missionary model, you know, then often what happens is if you're going with a missionary organization overseas, then you will be responsible for raising your own support. You're going to be going to your friends, your family, writing letters, asking for pledges, asking for money. You might go to different churches, asking for their support. And I'm not saying that's wrong, particularly if there's relationship there. But here's the problem that I've seen. Let's say a family goes overseas with a missions agency, and they've got a number of people, they've got a number of churches, who've been pledging their support. That family is then constantly going to have to be concerned about maintaining that support unless people forget about them. So they're writing regular newsletters back home. They have this need to tell success stories, kind of stir up people's emotions so that people will continue to give. And then when they come back to, if they come back to their home country, for a visit or for a rest, what often happens is there's this endless round going from church to church, parading the children around dressed up in the national, costume of the country, showing slides, please continue to give. And so rather than coming back for a rest, it's this exhausting fundraising tour to keep the money coming in. Now, I've known a few missionaries who've had to do that. Some of them, I would say, have had real issues in their family life or in their marriages, and it's mainly because they've really not been able to talk to anyone about the difficulties that they're facing, because they're always having to put on this facade that the mission is going well, so please keep giving. But if it's your home church that's sending you and that is taking responsibility for the oversight of the finances, then as you can imagine, that it relieves that worker of a huge burden and releases them to really be able to then focus on the work that they've been called to do. And then when they do come back for a visit, they can rest. Now, just to be clear, I'm not saying that people we send should always be financially supported from their home church or country. If someone is sent overseas to work cross-culturally, long-term, then I think they really need to be thinking about how they're going to financially support themselves long-term. If it's a primary leader, a church planter, it may be that support's going to come from the community that's going to gather there in time. But there are many other church workers who may not be supported full-time, and so how are they going to support themselves long-term? And I think that's important for two main reasons. I think the first is contextualization. It means really understanding and becoming relevant to the cultural context that you're in, becoming a native, as I've had to do here in the US. If you're going to truly be accepted by the people that you're working amongst, then, you've got to become one of them. You've got to be living and working there in the community. And that is hard to do if your support is continually coming from the motherland, as it were, because you'll always be seen as somewhat separate. You're a foreign missionary. So contextualization, but the other reason I think is so as not to be a burden. And obviously we see that in scriptures where the Apostle Paul made tents and used his trade where necessary to support himself so as not to be a burden to the churches. So, as a sending church, one of the things that we will therefore talk to our people about is how are they going to live somewhere long term? Do they have a trade? Do they have a kind of tent making skill that is going to support them? And of course, these days it's necessary in many countries in order to have a visa to be able to stay there. So one useful skill might be having a certificate to teach English as a foreign language, as a second language, and and a couple of our guys have gone and got that certificate to help them. But in the beginning stages, financial support from the sending church is usually needed. Often those being sent can't begin to work immediately, and we've come to realize that when a language has to be learned, it takes a long time and it's a lot of hard work. Now we learned this from one of our guys who we sent out 4 years ago to join Andy McCulloch there on his church planting team in Turkey, and they went with some financial support from us, but he also needed to get a job there teaching in order to support his family, and which is what he's currently doing. The problem with that is it leaves him very little time to really learn a language. And when I visited there and I saw the city, I realized, big city, public transportation to get to work, long commute, long hours at work, coming home exhausted, no energy left to do language studies, and not being paid a lot, and yet unable to get a better job without the language. So it's kind of catch-22. So his advice for anyone considering going into a different culture is to get financial support for 2 years so you can give yourself to learning that language. Go to language school or whatever, 2 years, and then think about getting a job. And we've taken that advice seriously. Our aim now is to financially support the people that we're sending out, which is mainly to the Arabian Peninsula. And we've got a couple we're supporting there full-time for 2 years right now while they learn the language. And obviously that's quite a financial undertaking for a church, and it would be hard for smaller churches, I know, to even be thinking in these terms. But we're not a big church, we're a medium-sized church, and for us it's meant taking a big annual offering specifically to be able to reach the nations. We've asked people to consider pledging a monthly amount on top of their tithe to support a particular couple. So, for example, $50, given by, say, 50 people or 50 families, that's $30,000 a year. That can almost support a couple overseas. We've got all our community groups involved, got them thinking about fundraising events, creative ways to raise funds themselves, because we want the whole church involved in this. We're having a church-wide yard sale next month. That's very popular here. That's like a car boot sale, but everyone sells their junk. So, we raise a lot of money that way to be able to support our guys overseas. Sometimes where there's a relationship between maybe a few churches, maybe working together in a particular sphere, there's the possibility of that group working together with the sending church in order to support overseas workers. Now, obviously, that means that it also means meeting with those who are being sent and helping them as well with their own finances. So we need to do that, make sure that they're debt-free, see if they're saving money, if that's possible, helping them to create a budget for working overseas and living there. And of course that doesn't end once they've gone either, because it then means continually reviewing their needs, helping them come up with a plan, what happens at the end of 2 years, and so on. So that's the first reason I think why people should be sent overseas with the involvement of the local church. And it has to do with finances. Right, the second reason has to do with pastoral care. I got to know a young couple who were being trained by a missions organization over here who specialized in sending people to unreached people groups in remote areas. It's like a 2-year program. They did the 2 years, and then they were sent out to a tribe in northern Mexico, up in the mountains there, and they were sent and pretty much just left to it. There was no real pastoral kind of support, no apostolic oversight, no relationship. They were just trained and then parachuted in. And the result of that was they really struggled and got badly burned by the experience. I mean, they're back in the States now, still recovering 2 or 3 years later. And again, I think it's another reason why people should be sent out from a local church where the pastors know the people they're sending. They should know if they're ready to go. They've got the relationship with them. They can continue to provide care for them after they've gone until they can become part of a new church community with its own elders in the culture that they're living in. Now, for us at New Frontiers Church, it means 3 main things. It means, I think, first of all, preparing people to go. Secondly, it means planning communication. And thirdly, prayer, right? 3 things for pastoral care. So preparing people to go. For For our team, it meant doing training with a missions group who specialize in the Islamic world. So I don't want to give the impression that we don't need parachurch organizations, because I think that there are many specialists out there who can really help us become more effective in planting in different cultures. Our church didn't have the necessary experience in the Islamic world and what kind of culture shock that our workers might face. And so working with this agency was very helpful in preparing our people to go, recognizing that culture shock is very real. And one of the things that they do is they ask a lot of, it's about 2 weeks assessment, residential, and they ask a lot of searching questions, do kind of psychological profiling. They're trying to uncover any weaknesses, any character issues that will need to be worked on, that inevitably will surface when you're in a pressure situation. So I would hope that in the future our own church will be able to do a lot more in terms of preparing people ourselves, because after all, we've got the relationship to speak into their lives and provide the ongoing accountability. But that kind of preparation, I think, is really important, preparing people to go into a different culture. And obviously within our family of churches, we've got training like from the nations to the nations to help to prepare people for that. The second thing would be, I think, planning for communication. I've come to realize how important that is and can be a lifeline to the people being sent out. It's so easy when we send people out that they just get forgotten about. With the best will in the world, it's kind of out of sight, out of mind. They're a photograph on the map of the world on the wall somewhere, and and as I say, they get forgotten about. And communication is not easy anyway, particularly if you're in a completely different time zone and it's a bit haphazard. And so that's why there's got to be a specific plan for communication, whether that's a phone call every 2 weeks or Skype call. And I know for myself, for that to become a reality, I have to appoint someone who's going to take responsibility for that and make sure it happens. So every one of our people we send out, they're given, they have a mentor here who will be in touch with them, who will encourage them, find out what their needs are, ask questions, let the elders know what's going on, how we can be praying, and so on. There should also be a plan for strategic visits, and actually, it's actually not helpful to have too much communication. And again, that's why I think there has to be a plan. Our team has been advised not to be on Facebook and not to be emailing people back home all the time. Part of that is for security reasons, but also I think if people are continually kind of looking back home, they will continue to be unsettled where they are. And so that's why there needs to be a plan for communication. It needs to be talked about, thought through, and put into place. And then finally, there's prayer, and probably the most underestimated and the most important thing of all. And this is where I'm very grateful for a couple in our church called Barry and Lee, who themselves have spent time overseas with their family, helping planting a church in Belgium, and then into Mexico, and with us now. And they understand from experience the importance of having people praying for you. Barry came to me and said, I really feel we need to be having a prayer group just to be praying for our people overseas. And I was very happy for that and thought it was going to be a monthly prayer gathering, but he said, no, it needs to be every week. And so every week there's a group of people who are praying for all of our workers overseas, praying for the situations there. And I'm just so thankful for that. They've seen some amazing answers to prayer, but more importantly, I think it's been such a lifeline for our workers, our members who are currently serving overseas. But we don't want prayer to be restricted just to a small group of people. It's important that our whole church is involved in that. So obviously when we gather the whole church for prayer, the nations are part of our focus in praying. Sunday mornings, we now have a live video link where on certain Sundays we'll have a couple who are over in the Arabian Peninsula. We'll have them on the live video link projected up on the screen. There's two ways they can see us, we can see them, we can talk to one another. Everyone can hear in the congregations as I'm asking them, questions, and then we can all pray for them together. We even had 15 babies dedicated recently at the church service, and this couple out in Arabia, they just had a baby out there, so they were able to join in on the celebration through live video link. And again, that's been a great way for the church to really keep envisioned and involved in the nations, and it's been great for overseas workers so they don't feel so isolated and feel supported. So, two practical reasons why I think people should be sent by local churches, and apart from the fact that it's biblical, it makes good sense both from a financial perspective and also because of pastoral care. Now, before I kind of conclude here and take any questions if you have any, let me just comment just very briefly on apostolic oversight, which of course is a whole subject in itself. But we believe in the role of apostles and prophets is crucial in planting churches. Local church leaders may they play an essential part in providing pastoral oversight, but we need apostles and prophets to bring strategic wisdom and revelation to be able to lay good foundations and see healthy churches engaging in mission. So for our guys in the Middle East, there's actually more than one sending church providing pastoral oversight, but there's just one team providing apostolic oversight. That's myself, Sam Poe, who works with me here, Andy Martin in the UK, and one of our guys on the ground out in the Arabian Peninsula who leads the team out there. So it raises the question, when we engage in cross-cultural mission, where does the authority for that mission lie? Who's responsible? Is it the people who are being sent? Is it the sending church? Or is it the apostolic team? In the traditional kind of model, it tends to be the people on the ground who have been sent that making all the decisions there. But I think the answer's got to be it's the relationship between all three. That we work together in relationship with one another, using all of our different gifts to serve God's purposes there and to see His kingdom advanced. So that's about all I've got to say about that. So if there's any questions, I'll be happy to take any now.
Okay, thanks, Ian. I've got a few questions for you. Really, I guess in what you've talked about, but zeroing it down to the very early stages of planting, some of the guys listening will be at this stage. Others may be a few people on from here. But I guess my question really was all that you've talked about. But when there's like 10 of you and or even less, you're fighting to live and breathe as a church plant to just get yourself off the ground where success feels like 2 more people. How do you get that small group pumped for world mission? And how do you talk when you're trying to gather people to you in your church plant? How do you talk about wanting people to go to other places? Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's a great question. And again, I think it comes back to it's really part of the vision of the church, right from the beginning. When we came here, so we started with 20 people, and so right from the beginning, we had flags, hanging up. When we started gathering in a public meeting place, that is, we had flags hanging up of the nations. We were praying for different nationalities that might be in our city. Praying that God will bring nations into our church plant. I remember at one time we were praying for 20 nations to be represented in our church plant. Sponsoring a nation. I remember back then we sponsored Somalia because we had a connection with Somalians in a city near us where there's a lot of refugees coming in. and we had a couple of guys who would do a basketball kind of clinic up there, and would be doing that with a lot of Somalian kids. So we want to be praying for that nation. I remember when we had when Colin was with us, we had Faye McDonald come through, and I knew Faye from England, and we had her come and speak at our Sunday gathering. Again, small group of people. I remember, so she was preaching the message that morning, and she came dressed in a full burqa. She'd just come back from the Middle East, and so all you could see was her eyes, and she just told this 3 monologues of people that she knew, that she got to know when she was in the Middle East. She told their stories as these monologues. She was crying. Everyone was crying. She gave a call at the end to come forward to go to the nations. The whole church went forward, I mean, again, it's just a small group of us, and no one went then, but it's all beginning to play out now. We had no idea. A third of our kind of church back then were either homeless or on drugs, and so it was like, how do you begin to think about going to the nations? But it's got to start, I think, with the heart vision of where you want to see yourselves going. I think praying into that, sharing about that. I mean, that's how we went about it, and then God brought people along who became very instrumental, became catalysts, really, opening doors really to go into other nations, and that was just totally a God thing. But I really believe it's because we had a heart for it in the beginning. It's something that we were kind of living with right back when we were a church plant. I don't know if that answers the question, but hopefully that's helpful.
No, it's very good. Let me be slightly cantankerous and zero the question more down to the church planter or the church planting couple. How do you? So one of the things that's slightly often the people talk about going to the nations at any of the conferences or anything like that tend to be the people that travel a lot to these nations and are well connected, but the average planter planting in the UK, planting in the average town or estate, is not that person. So how do they get themselves, even within themselves, how do they make that part of who they are? Because for it to come out in the church, it needs to be within the person. So even in Manchester, the only reason I'm really particularly interested in the nations is because Colin travels a lot. I hear lots of stories, and that sparks something within me. But otherwise, it's probably unlikely to a level. So within yourself, does that make sense? How do you bring that out?
Well, you need to listen to Andy Martin's broadcast on the importance of having a global focus. I mean, at the end of the day, we've got to be biblically convinced that God's intention is that we are reaching the nations. Now, I know we can all say, well, we're doing our bit right here. But I think it comes down to, do we have a vision where, yes, we're reaching the people right where we are, and which, of course, may include the nations, and where you are, well, certainly does. So that's clearly part of it. But, what about the ends of the earth? So I think you've got to be biblically convinced to start with. If we're not biblically convinced, then we're not really going to be going anywhere with this. But if we are, then I think it's prayer as to how is that going to be worked out here. As I said, for us, we couldn't see how on earth that was going to happen. But we had a heart for it. We were praying. And one day God brought along a young man who was very instrumental, and it was just an amazing God thing where a door opened for him to go out into the Middle East, and it's just one of those kind of God things that happened. But it was an answer to prayer. He became a catalyst for others to go, stirred up the church. I didn't have to do it. He was a catalyst for it, and provided really a means for people to be able to go overseas. So, I mean, I can't say too much more about that here, but so I think you've got to be biblically convinced, and I think that it's got to start in prayer. That would be my answer to that.
That's good, thank you. It wouldn't be a broadcast if I didn't ask a mildly obnoxious question. Right, so let's open it to the floor. I'll just pick through the screens and I see if you got a question. If you haven't, or you're waiting for someone else to ask to inspire you, then that's fine. Tim in Hereford, any questions really from what Ian said?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Good. Yeah, Tim Simmons asked my question already, but another question is, Ian, how many people were you in your church before you first sent out somebody to the nations?
Well, I would say we were about 80 people when we sent someone out to the Middle East, which was 4 years ago. Yeah, about that, 4 years ago. 80 to 100 people.
And did you support them financially full time?
No, we didn't. That's only been a fairly recent thing. That person, well, we did our best to support him with as much as we could, but he was getting support from other people he knew, other churches even, and even today I'm still trying to raise support for him from other churches in the US, trying to work together really. So he's been out there a while with a younger couple who's out there now who we are supporting full time, but we're now like 250, so we're a bit more able to do that. But again, it's being our goal to try and get to that point. And so whenever we have budget meetings, those kind of things are factoring in our decision making. We've made that a priority. And so our goal really is to send 2 people out or a couple every 2 years to learn the language. And to be able to support them full time doing that. As we grow, hopefully we can do more. But that's where we started, and when we first sent someone out, yeah.
Thanks.
That's great. Thanks, guys. Okay, let's go to glorious South Wales, to the Vincent households. Do you guys have any questions there? Any thoughts that have arisen?
Yeah, we've got 2 questions. Are we allowed 2?
Yes, you are.
Alan.
Okay. Can you turn that, please? Have you got me?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm on. Come on.
Yeah.
I appreciate that there's a competition for cash in the way that you describe missionary societies sending out people who have to raise their own support, and pastors will see them as predatory if the church finances have got to be plundered by visiting missionaries and the like. However, if you set up your church with a banner above it saying you're a platform to reach the nations, do you have people constantly coming to your church who are would-be missionaries who are looking to use you as a platform legitimately or maybe not? How do you cope with all of that?
I'd be very happy if that was the case, and with a lot of people wanting to come be involved with us overseas. We've had all kinds of people asking us for money to go here, there, and everywhere, but obviously we have to be strategic about who we're supporting and how we're supporting them. So right now we're only supporting people where we are directly, apostolically involved in a situation where we are giving oversight. We partially support a couple who are with Andy McCulloch there, but that we're not directly involved in that. We're involved in praying for that church. We're praying for them, praying for the city there, but we're not directly involved in terms of oversight. So it's only the people where we are strategically involved with, apostolically involved in what they're doing, where we will support them. We may bless people in going. We may take up an offering to send people to other places. We have quite a work going on into Nepal right now through one of our businessmen in the church, and so people are going to Nepal. But again, it's not a priority in terms of we're not strategically involved there. People may go and we may send and bless, but where we're financially supporting people, it's where our team is directly involved in that situation. I don't know if that answers the question, but that's how we're prioritizing it.
That's a great way to local church working with local church. Very good. Swansea, did you have another question? Part 2.
Yes, please. Yeah.
Go for it.
You obviously talked about that when people sent, you have a strategy for communication. You have a strategy. People don't get forgotten. You have a strategy to pray for them, talk through their expectations or whatever. You know, it's quite like thought out all that way. Can I take you then back all the way the other way to when that person is like, say, 18 and gets a call to the nations and responds because Faye McDonald comes? Do you or have you had a strategy for that 18-year-old all the way to the point they're sent? So what I mean is, I know one answer would be we'd send them on a cross-cultural short missions trip, but have you seen or do you know of churches where that's been developed a strategy from the first seed of a call all the way through? Do you know what I mean? I think you've only seen my hands there. Look, that's my face. There you go. Is that help? Is that good? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. That's a great question. I mean, we have a strategy. I don't know other churches, but you know, I've got Sam Poe working with me here. We're doing chronological Bible storying, which we really believe is an important strategic tool for reaching other cultures with the gospel. And so all of our community groups are doing this. So it's called Share the Story. You can look it up on biblicalstorying.com, and you'll see the website for it there. But what it means is that people who are coming into our community groups are learning this method of sharing the gospel, or at least getting a biblical worldview through going through the Bible story by story. We have 3 different kind of sets of stories. One is the big narrative kind of redemption track story, which is about 30 stories. Another one is focused on the Gospels and what does it mean to be a disciple of Jesus. And then the final one is on the book of Acts and what does it mean to be the church. And so we're looking at getting people saved through the redemptive stories, what it means to be a disciple of Jesus in the Gospel stories, and then what does it mean to plant a church in the stories in the book of Acts. That's a strategy we have, and that other churches of ours are doing as well in the United States. What it means is someone who's been through that, and we're apprenticing people within our groups to be able to tell the stories themselves and lead people in dialogue and so on. That is transferable. It's a very reproducible strategy that can be taken into any context and applied in any culture. It has to be applied because you have to understand the culture you're going into and choosing your stories. But it means we're training people in a sense right from when they're coming into a community group. They have this tool which can be used right where we are in discipling people, making disciples where we are. But if someone feels called to go overseas, they can take that with them and they can kind of replicate it there, if that makes sense. We have a mentoring program as well in our church. Sam Poe is mentoring right now 4 young guys. One of them is 18, and really giving them some more specific training in biblical storying, and doing a lot of kind of research into that, as well as we are starting tonight. Actually, we're starting an evangelistic set of stories in a public place, in a cafe near here, called the Jesus Stories. 10 weeks, it's like Alpha, but rather than give a talk, you tell the story, and then you have dialogue around it in small groups. So they're engaging in that. They've been developing those stories. So they're being trained. And this one young guy who's 18 years old, basically we're looking to him to become the next Sam Poe, so he can go and do what Sam is currently doing in other nations. So we have the strategy through biblical storying. We have a specific mentoring program in our church, and so that's how we see it people coming in, as you're saying, 18 years old and going right through, depending on what really God's calling them to. That's how we're doing it. Obviously, it's been developed over a period of time. But hopefully that answers your question.
That's great. Thanks, Ian. Colin in Manchester, you got a question you want to ask?
Yeah. Hi, Ian.
Hey, Colin. How are you?
I'm doing okay, thanks, my friend. How's New York going? That's my question.
Still springtime, scheduled for springtime. Spring in time in New York. Yeah.
Brilliant.
Yeah, that's all moving along. We will see you there. I'll give you. I'll let you know, and I'll see you out there.
We've been praying for a church plant in New York, so cross-cultural that is for most Americans, I think.
And for us as well.
Very good. Okay, from New York to Kidderminster. Paul, do you have any questions from what Ian has said?
Yeah, I was quite interested just to hear a little bit about when you first started out, Ian. How you sort of set the culture of going to the nations in a brand new church. You said about the flags and stuff. How did you sort of communicate that vision? How did you sort of get started really on that?
Ian Duke says hi, by the way. He keeps texting me while I'm talking, making comments about my shirt and my beard. How do I? Well, again, I think it's when I preach, and I'm preaching about application. I'll be talking about us as a church and the fact that God's called us to reach the nations. So it's going to come through in the preaching. It's going to come through when we gather as a church to pray, because we're hearing, for example, what's happening in the Ukraine, and so I don't know about you guys, but we've been praying for our friends in the Ukraine. Obviously, being part of a worldwide family of churches, we have a lot of opportunity to do that, to hear what's going on in other places. And so I think taking advantage of that, bringing that into our church settings, giving people a vision for New Frontiers worldwide and other apostolic spheres and what they're doing, that is very helpful. Obviously, we have to be intentional about it. Maybe it is a banner, saying, to the nations. Our vision statement is we exist to glorify God by making disciples who will change the nations and will change the world. So, we will often quote that. And but I understand, you have this big vision, but how do you put legs on it? Where do you start? So I think it's got to be starting with the people who are around you in your own city, having a heart for them. We've got a number of Muslims near where we are, and I've got to know one or two, through our church. We had a guy come to us, actually, Syrian guy, came to our church meeting and ended up being invited to a community group where they were telling the story of Abraham, and this guy had all the questions that night. And but we're just very intentional about praying for the people who are in our community who might be from other nations, being aware of what's going on worldwide, both in the news and in New Frontiers. We can't pray for everything. We can't be sharing about everything, but maybe there might be a particular link or focus. When I was back in England, and there used to be Brighton, conference, we'd have guys come over, where Scott Marks come over from Zim, and he would stay with our church. We'd sponsor him to come over. That was a great way for us to be able to have a link with Zimbabwe. And that church, 12 years later, because I've been here 12 years now, they're still involved with Zimbabwe. Just built a school or a building out there with a team sent from my old church. So, I think we've got to be creative. We've got to think of ways, how do we form these connections, with other nations that can help us to really be envisioned and involved.
That's great. Thank you very much. Right, let's head to Wednesbury. Nathan and Rada, have you guys got a question?
We need to be quick because Croatia is starting playing soon. That's very
You go for it.
Yeah, so we'll show a brief encouragement, and then we've got at least one definite question, maybe another after. And just the encouragement is we started off with 5 of us from the Wolverhampton church, 5 of us in Wednesbury, and almost straight away one of the girls started feeling a call for Spain, and within 12 months of starting the small group, she'd gone to Spain, and she's still there working with the church there. So although it was really tough for us going straight away down from 5, it was great that was there right from the start, that we were sending someone out, although it didn't feel quite so easy at the time. And then our question is, when you've got sort of a church like yours, Ian, that's a fairly big established church, probably by British standards, and you're sending out and you've got certain nations that you're interested in, and then when you plant out locally, does that local plant, does that carry the same nations' interest with it, or does it sort of develop its own interest in new nations?
Thanks for that. That's very encouraging, what you just said about the girl going to Spain. So that's excellent. Sorry, the question again was about when we plant locally, are they going to have that same involvement in the nations? I mean, the guys that we're training up who are going to go and plant locally, like the guy we're sending out to New York City, it will be in his DNA. Almost certainly they're going to have a heart for the nations. I would fully expect them to form their own links. They may start off being involved with us in what we're doing in the Middle East because it's relationship. There's good friends with guys who are out there. So I suspect that initially they will be involved with what we're doing in the Middle East. But I suspect that as that develops, as a church grows, they may find their own links because they're in a different city, a different situation. People are going to come into their church, like your girl, with a heart for somewhere else. So I think all of that comes down to God's leading and really just being under the Holy Spirit as to how God leads. But I would certainly expect and hope that they would have a heart for the nations, and that would be part of their DNA, something they're praying for right from the beginning.
Great, thanks. That's the only question. We don't have another one. Thanks a lot.
Great, thanks, guys. Yeah, go for it.
I don't think any of us should feel a pressure that so are we meant to be doing something in the nations? I mean, particularly I know it's like when you're grafting away, trying to build something from scratch and can barely hold on to the people you've got, let alone thinking about people going out to other places. But all of that is in God's hands, isn't it? I think it comes down to, do we have a heart for the nations? God works out the rest. I don't think there's a time scale. I don't think we should feel the pressure that somehow something's got to happen. But are we carrying the nations in our hearts? And I think if we're biblically convinced, if we're carrying it in our hearts, it's something that we're looking to pray about. I really believe that God is the one who will open the doors in His time. So I don't feel we should we should have the pressure to try and make something happen. But certainly our experiences, as we have shared, as we've prayed, God has opened doors for us.
Brilliant, brilliant. Okay, well, thank you very much. Thanks everyone for tuning in, and thank you to Ian. What we'll do is we'll do a traditional broadcast thank you where we all leave our microphones muted, but we all wave enthusiastically. I feel like Hannah in Swansea is going to be very good at this. Wave enthusiastically at the camera just to say thank you to Ian. So let's see, look, Hannah's leading the way, and the rest of us can, feel slightly awkward as we do it. So yeah, thank you very much. We will end there. So thank you very much again to Ian.